Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Internet Landscapes, Pathways to Expanding Public and Community Internet. My name is Kate Rivera. I am the Executive Director of the Technology Learning Collaborative. And I'm going to start off by just going through our agenda for this morning. So we are going to give just a little bit of background on who we are, the Technology Learning Collaborative and the Affiliate Community Wireless, and our partnership. Then we'll give also kind of a baseline conversation around what community internet is. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about Philly Community Wireless, their story and their model. And then we're going to kind of broaden the conversation out and go through the lessons that we've learned from our partnership, which should be broadly applicable to you and your community, no matter where you are in the country. And then we're going to end with just a little bit of a case study of some work that we've been doing in Camden, New Jersey. So the Technology Learning Collaborative, or TLC, we are a digital equity coalition in the Philadelphia area. If you've made your way to this webinar, I'm going to guess that you already know what digital equity is, so I won't define that. I do want to just give a kind of a call out and thank you to this wonderful graphic from the Alliance for Digital Equity in Massachusetts that we like to use when we're kind of explaining these issues. But so TLC as a coalition, we are a nonprofit, but we don't provide direct services ourselves. Instead, we are focused on supporting the ecosystem of organizations and individuals who are working on digital equity in the greater Philadelphia area. We do that through kind of professional development and capacity building, really bringing folks together and encouraging collaboration, and then advocating for the needs of our communities and for digital equity. I'll also kind of briefly touch on Philly Community Wireless's mission, and you'll hear a lot more about their work from Leanne in a few minutes. But Philly Community Wireless is a community internet solution focused on certain neighborhoods of Philadelphia where there is a great need. Focused on building large-scale and no-cost Wi-Fi networks. We're going to be talking a little bit more about how their model and similar models throughout the country really serve as an alternative model for expanding internet access, making sure it's affordable, and kind of solving complex needs, especially in urban settings. So our partnership, we have been working together for over a year now through a grant that we received from People's Media Fund, which is a local kind of Philadelphia foundation. And through that grant, we have been kind of working together on the idea of kind of planting seeds for the community internet beyond Philly Community Wireless's current kind of geographic focus area. Exploring, more about what the needs are in communities and what some steps are that communities can take, whether it's a small step or a large step towards these types of community internet models in different parts of Philadelphia or this state or even the country. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, David, to talk a little bit more about what community internet is.
Thanks, Kate. My name is David Cooper Moore. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement at TLC. So I work closely on the ground with a lot of the groups that we work with in our coalition. I work closely with digital navigator organizations and a lot of other groups that are providing digital equity services to communities. And in the course of that work, I've really experienced a lot of the groups and the people who are interested in expanding their own internet access, right, for reasons of affordability, for reasons of basic access. And this community internet model is very new to them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the focus groups that we ran, some of the conversations that we had with communities, and what we learned from folks in communities about what their internet needs are. We were able to convene a lot of different groups here in Philadelphia to just have conversations about what folks' barriers to internet access were. And what we found was that it was a really good opportunity to provide some background education and sort of pathways to advocacy for different groups of people to think about how they can imagine an internet landscape that's a little bit different from what they're used to, right? The reality is that most people are used to the private internet landscape in the United States, right? Most of the programs that we have to expand internet access have been really focused on creating subsidies to expand access to private internet providers. As we say here, over the past several decades, private and public internet initiatives have expanded digital equity across the United States. So it's important to underline that the expansion of internet has been very broadly successful. However, the digital divide persists, and it has kind of shifted a little bit as folks have access to the internet through smartphones and through subsidy programs and other things. Because even in major urban centers like Philadelphia, there are still these major barriers to access, and a lot of times, folks that we spoke to hadn't really thought a lot about the internet landscape at all. And so, talking to them about how the internet landscape kind of functions, right? The major ISP providers often have, very high coverage of the number of people connected to the internet, so that it often feels like there are not any alternatives to getting internet access besides going through this kind of private landscape. The public landscape is one that a lot of folks don't really know um, some of the advocacy background, especially in Pennsylvania, where municipal internet has been de facto illegal in Pennsylvania for many years. We're one of many states that have these kinds of restrictions on providing municipal internet. And so when we talk about publicly available internet, a lot of folks are really limited to thinking about, where's the nearest library to provide an internet access point. There may be some private initiatives like, lift zones from Comcast or other ways to kind of expand some of those private internet options. But a lot of folks really haven't thought about, what kinds of internet options might be available to them. And so we were able in these conversations to really lay out a lot of the background that I think folks need to even start thinking about how they might approach internet differently than what they might be used to. Uh, so community internet, right, is kind of a new concept for a lot of folks that we spoke to in our groups, right? The community network is when individuals come together to establish and maintain an internet connection themselves. It's internet by the people and for the people. And what this looks like are providers like PCW that are providing internet through a mesh network where folks actually take on devices that allow them to receive and then share out internet connectivity, which PCW is going to talk about. When we start describing the nature of community internet, both the possibilities for it through groups like PCW and the idea of bringing communities together to take some ownership of the process of providing internet, not just for your own, residents, but for your neighbors and throughout the neighborhood, providing public internet access as well. People were really, really attracted to this idea. And so one of the main things that ended up happening in a lot of our focus groups was people just wanting to learn about how this actually works. How can I get involved? How can I like join this network? If it's not available here, how do we get started with it? There is a huge appetite for community models for folks that are struggling with affordability, or even just, in principle, believe that the internet is a utility and it's a human right to have access to the internet, and they want to expand internet access. So we were really kind of energized when we were having these conversations with folks with just how excited they were to have this conversation with us and want to kind of get involved. And so in terms of getting involved, I think this is where we're going to learn a little bit more about what PCW does, and learn a little bit how they kind of built up their network and how they've been able to spread that model to other places as well. So I'm going to turn things over to Leanne.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne Przybylowski. I'm the Community Outreach Manager here at Philly Community Wireless. I'm going to talk a little bit about our background for those of you who may not already be familiar with us. Can I get the next slide, please? Perfect. Thank you. So today, 6 years into our organization, through dozens of partnerships, we've installed over 130 Wi-Fi access points at approximately 55 unique locations. And that through those partnerships and that model, we provide free Wi-Fi to tens of thousands of people in underserved areas of Philadelphia, where data consistently shows kind of the lowest levels of broadband access. A key part of our network is our ISP partner, Philly Whisper, who is a local independent wireless ISP. They donate bandwidth and installation support to us that we then, our work is to share it with the community. In our model, and I'll show this visually in just a minute, different property owners work together all over our service area to host our equipment. And at each site, we aim to create 360-degree coverage so that we can cover like 1 to 2 surrounding blocks, and ensure that Wi-Fi is is accessible in not only a private person's home where we can set up a private network, but also freely available in the streets, sidewalks, neighboring houses, parks, etc. Because we're a community-based internet and because community members we rely on them to host our equipment, this ensures that community members are actively involved in kind of the build out of our network as stewards of devices, as decision makers, as to kind of where our network goes and how we access it and things like that. I'm going to pull up briefly our network map. And so this is a map that is available on our website. And let's just make sure. Perfect. So just for some context, for those of you who are not here in Philadelphia or are not familiar with where we are in Philadelphia, we are located kind of in the eastern part of North Philadelphia, again, just in part due to the fact that data shows this area as having a lot of broadband need. And so the span of our network kind of hits 3 different neighborhoods here in Norris Square, here in what's considered Fair Hill, and here in Kensington. We started in 2020. Alex, our executive director, was actually a co-founder. And when we started in 2020, it was a small group of dedicated volunteers who kind of came together and wanted to create a sustainable option for free internet access during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the way that this started out was through a pilot project here in Norris Square, in order to provide connectivity into Norris Square Park, which you can see here on our map. I'm going to just activate some of these connections on our map, which help delineate or help visualize sort of the architecture of our network. You can see in the first year of our organization, we were able to build several different sites kind of around this Norris Square Park area through volunteers and through minimal funding. And we've got this heat map feature on our network map that kind of shows, it's not quite an accurate heat map, but it does kind of visualize that idea around how our Wi-Fi model is to spread out free Wi-Fi from these different sites so that we can ideally over time build out one contiguous network that makes sure internet access is available to all in every single type of space here in the city. And so just coming back to kind of this overview lay of our map, in 2021, this is what we were able to build out as a small organization. As we grew, in 2022, we started to receive different funding. We became a key partner with People's Media Fund, for example. And then in 2023, we were able to continue to expand. We started to explore a little bit more outside of the Norris Square area into Fair Hill and Kensington here. Also in 2023, we were able to hire on more staff. So Alex, having been in a volunteer role previously, was able to be hired as our part-time executive director. Then in 2024, we finally hired 2 full-time staff members, myself and our technician, Eugene Rue. And we, again, continue to expand our network. And you can see in the last couple of years, we've really taken on kind of, especially here in the Kensington area. So this is the current expansion of our network, and just shows a little bit of kind of timeline or history as to how we have grown over the last few years. Perfect. And that's everything from me. I think I'm going to turn it back over to David at this point.
So getting started is one of the big questions that folks have around, building a network like this. PCW's story is unique, but every story of everyone starting a network like this is unique. One thing that we really focused on as we were getting input from communities and sort of spreading the word about PCW and about, even just the concept of community internet, is that people really want to understand what their role is, given where they are, given what's available to them, and given maybe limitations that they have in getting started or in building out something, like a model like what PCW has. And so I wanted to just kind of highlight some of the main lessons learned that we had from our conversations with folks. The first one is just assessing internet needs in the first place. Um, Folks have very different internet needs depending on their location, depending on their service providers in the area, depending on their history with internet connectivity. And so, one thing that became really clear with every organization that we worked with is that community leaders, anchor institutions, other folks are constantly trying to figure out, right, what are the actual internet needs of our neighbors and of our communities. Um, so one thing that our participants described a lot in the conversations that we had was the importance of community outreach efforts and this idea of like detective work, right? A lot of folks that work in social services and anchor institutions describe having to kind of go door to door to talk to people about what their actual internet needs are, because what they tend to discover is folks without internet access or reliable internet access will just kind of show up with their needs, right, to places where there are, limited public internet available, often places like libraries or social service organizations that provide internet access to folks. And so a lot of the work that we did in some areas where there was no community internet network, and a lot of folks that we were talking to were talking a lot about those barriers that they wanted to address, right? And so part of this was us discovering that just convening these conversations brought up a lot of connections, partnership potentials, needs that communities have, right? So this idea kind of became very clear in a lot of the folks that we spoke to, that we need to connect to anchor institutions to have existing coalitions, right? We have our Digital Equity Coalition with the Technology Learning Collaborative, but there are also coalitions that are among different social service providers or CDCs or the library system, or lots of other places where people are kind of getting together to talk about these needs. So leaning on those coalitions is a really important first step in on better understanding the internet needs in the community so that you can put forward this vision that we're talking about. Because a lot of times when we started these conversations, the amount of framing that we had to do and kind of resource gathering that folks were interested in was a really important precursor to being able to expand internet options, right? Just literally figuring out where are the needs and how do we address those needs and who is currently trying to address those needs. Um, the next step up from that, right, the sort of next level in our conversation is empowering folks as advocates for community internet. So a lot of folks, once we start talking about this vision for a community internet model, their next question is, okay, so how do we start, right? How do we get started with this? And they're not necessarily in a position to build a community internet network yet. What they really need is a way to sort of advocate for this vision right in their communities. So the advocacy tends to begin with a shared community vision, which is one reason why these kinds of gatherings, these information sessions, and getting together, key partners from the groups that we spoke to, um, developing this shared community vision is really important. And it's also important to find dedicated community leaders with local connections. So when we had our conversation series, we would have folks that came in that were property owners that were thinking, well, we have these high sites, we own this building that's really high up. Could we put a device here and start the community internet network? We had folks that we spoke to who are really intimately connected with the local government officials who are talking about internet connectivity. And they said, can we find some backhaul, some internet sources that we could use to start something like this? And so figuring out the ways to empower people to advocate for this vision is really important. And, getting folks together and thinking about, where are the possibilities? One thing that's really inspiring about the PCW story is that if you have the right initial connection, right, you can start small and you can build something really pretty huge. So we found a lot of folks who were, thinking about how do we, understand the needs in our community, but also how do we actually become empowered as advocates to try to make this change for real. And so the next step up for that is actually joining or growing an existing network. And this is one that, PCW is the expert in this area, so I'm going to let them describe this themselves.
Thanks, David. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Alex Wormer-Colin. I'm the executive director for Philly Community Wireless, like Leanne said, and a longtime volunteer and co-founder. And I live in the community where we started, Norris Square. And when I think about this question, how do we join or grow an existing network? I think if you have the opportunity to join an existing network, I would, of course, say to start there. If there are people in your community where you live who do digital equity work of any kind, start by talking with them. Um, and then, start from where you live and where you are and think about what you can do for the communities directly around you. And I want to go into a few different examples of how you can approach, exploring that question. If you want to proceed on the slide, David, we have kind of three main ways we're going to break it down for you. And we'll start by showing you what our model is or how it looks with us, and then kind of talk through what you could do wherever you might be. So this is a beautiful but somewhat complex diagram showcasing a similar view of the network that you saw from Leanne's map, where there's a high site. It's actually called Gotham Tower, uh, of the Batman lore. But it's now a residential housing complex. And Philly Whisper, the internet service provider that we partner with, built out wireless signals from their water tower about a decade ago or more. And being able to partner with Philly Whisper from the beginning enabled us to leverage their internet connections to share with the community. And I always like to emphasize, it was their willingness to not restrict the use of the broadband that they were providing to the residents in the community that enabled our network to grow so quickly. One of the first things I would encourage you to do if you're thinking of building a network somewhere is just put up a Wi-Fi hotspot in a public space. That's it. And go from there. Some kind of oasis for people to come around. And so if you look at the kind of east side or well, it's technically the northwest side of the park, there would be a church, the West Kensington Ministry, the first place we ever were working with to install Wi-Fi. And from there, we had a partner in the pastor, um, Reverend Adon Morena, and he helped us explore how to connect with other community members in the neighborhood to build out the network one step at a time. In each case, we would find a community organization, a resident who was willing to share their real estate to let us mount Wi-Fi access points that would broadcast Wi-Fi into the park, as well as radios that would communicate with Philly Whisper's tower. And slowly, by installing on every side of the park, we were able to fill the whole park with Wi-Fi. The biggest obstacle being trees. But as you can see, a lot of different community members come together, businesses, residents, the grassroots community members who help build the network. Most importantly, for sure, the community organizations that vouch for us, that help us get in the door and become a trusted partner with the community. And then, the community members who actually use the Wi-Fi our closest clients, oftentimes the people who we don't meet face to face. Our particular network, people who visit the public network are not tracked in any way. We don't know who they are. We respect their anonymity. And so we only get to meet some of our users, the people who host our antennas, the people who talk to us in various community gatherings like these. Um, but that's the kind of unique relationships we get to build through this process. If you want to proceed to the next slide. So yeah, what I'm really excited to talk about is how we build our own network, how you can build a network. If there's a network like the one you just saw near you that you can join, start there. In our case in Philadelphia, there's New York City right nearby, among other places that have community networks where volunteers are allowed to join and learn new skills. And that was certainly one of the things that I benefited from early on. Um, so some communities are ready to build a community internet network in their local area, and you might be surprised what's possible in the areas where you are. Um, like I said, it's important to start on a kind of lean basis, looking for something simple to begin to bring a community around. Once you show what's possible, I think people's minds can really be changed. For a lot of people, it's normal to think about going into the public park to help clean it up. That's something everyone feels like they could contribute to. But not everyone feels like they could help build a community network. And people are often very surprised to learn that they already have a lot of the skills necessary to do that, or that they would really benefit from and enjoy learning the other skills to help build out Wi-Fi in their community. You want to go to the next slide? So this was kind of the three types of options I wanted to talk about. If I had to break it down for you of how you can build your own network, and there are lots of other great blog posts out there and videos and presentations and articles about how one could explore this. And I actually would say these are in no particular order. We partnered with an established ISP, but it's hard to find an ISP that's willing to partner with you. It shouldn't be that way, and maybe that will change. Maybe every ISP will realize they should support these kinds of initiatives and that it's no sweat off their back. But given that's unlikely to happen in this day and age, the ideal option would be the second one, build out your own internet backhaul. But that is by far the most complex and requires the most amount of investment upfront, of finances, and skills. But there are many examples around the country where that has happened in various ways. Some of those cases, though, and this would be true for our Philly Community Wireless too, is that we're not going to start that way. And I think very rarely do networks start with number two building their own backhaul. With that said, we've consulted with a variety of community networks over the last few years, including Tucson Mesh, who was just getting started and was looking to learn from other community networks like ourselves in New York City Mesh. And I think they were very inspired by the New York City Mesh model and were able to build out their own backhaul to build a small community network in Tucson that I think continues to grow. There's so much going on that we couldn't even kind of encompass it all or have a sense of, from our own perspective, of what people are doing in other cities. And I think one of the most important things to say is that, there's no one size that fits all. Every community network in every city is quite different between Baltimore, Detroit, Seattle, Vancouver. There's been lots of different projects we've learned from over the years. But if I were to have one recommendation, like I said before, is to start with number three. And this can look like many different forms of kind of supporting the community. It's very, very likely that in your community there are nonprofit organizations with internet networks that don't work very well, and you could help them, or you could explore how they could find the help that they need. And when we say helping them, expand private internet service with Wi-Fi build-outs, sometimes that means, as in the case of Zion Baptist Ministry, where we worked for a long time and continue to work, they pay for Comcast business internet. We cannot provide our internet in their part of the city. And so we've helped to build out a robust Wi-Fi network throughout the church, and just support the needs of their community. And that's become a model that we're hoping to grow where even in places where our wireless network is not available, we can still support people with their internet needs in a variety of ways, ensure more people can access the internet. Similarly, we're often supporting communities that are looking to build out Wi-Fi in public spaces and green spaces that they own. And so that's an easy win for a community organization where they already are paying for internet. And the complexity technically would just be to install an outdoor Wi-Fi access point that can broadcast Wi-Fi into a green space that they own or that the community regularly uses. And that can then become kind of the hub or the seed to grow the network around it. So we could proceed to the next slide. I just wanted to bring up as one example of how this has played out for Philly Community Wireless. If you're not too familiar with the geography of Philly, Camden is just east of Philadelphia and the Delaware River. Truthfully, geographically, it might as well be part of Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a part of the city west of the river called West Philadelphia. And I'm sure New Jerseyans wouldn't like me saying it, but Camden could be East Philadelphia. Um, and Camden is in a similar situation to Philadelphia, where there's a lot of digital inequity. And we were grateful to hear from Benjamin Sirocco at the Rowan University, who approached us around the time that we began this TLC collaboration, hoping to see how we could come to Camden to do something similar there. And it was really thanks to this grant that I think those conversations were able to get off the ground. Even maybe before you start helping someone build out Wi-Fi, being able to say to a community organization you're not yet connected with, we have funds to host an event, and we would love to bring together a group of people to talk about what's possible. That can be the catalyst for so much more. And I think Ben was really inspired to apply for a grant out of that fostered two installations we did in Camden around public health and raising awareness about air quality, where we worked with nonprofits to expand internet to their public green spaces next to their buildings and install air monitors. And we hope to do more work in Camden and to either grow out our network there in some way or foster a, equivalent kind of Camden community wireless. But it's been a great example of what we hope to do all over the city and what we hope to offer as a model for other communities around the country that are looking to make small impacts in their neighborhood. So I think with that, we'll turn to Q&A and I'll hand it over to David to lead that.
That's great. Yeah, I think before we get started with the Q&A, I think that the Camden example is a really good one because it points out how every conversation and community gathering that we have has an outcome from it that's a little bit different depending on the area, right? In Camden, it leads to applying for a grant to try to build this network for, for their communities. In the case of when we went to Tacony, right, we were going to help them essentially extend some of the Wi-Fi options that are available through some of their central hubs, including the library and some social service providers. Other places, folks want to get directly involved with PCW, and each time that we brought community members together, a different outcome, towards broader, more community available internet kind of emerged from that, which I thought was really inspiring. I'm curious if anybody here has any questions. These could be questions for PCW about the partnership. You can feel free to use the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question for all of us. I have plenty of questions to ask of everybody, but I'm going to defer to the folks here first. So I guess one question that I have for everybody, which I'll exempt myself from answering, is specifically about this partnership. What do you see as the relationship between a community internet provider like PCW and the Digital Equity Coalition like TLC? Like where is the synergy in this kind of a collaboration?
I'll just start quickly to say, I mean, there's so much that we can't do, and we are constantly exposed to how much people need. And so when we go to provide internet at someone's house, we often end up supporting them in a lot of other ways that are time consuming. And, we've had all kinds of examples where defining the boundaries of an internet service provider and a computer technical support person, it's hard to define. And uh, one of the unique advantages we have that very few digital equity organizations are doing is that we're going into people's houses and we're not going there for profit like other ISPs, and that we are willing to take the time to talk with people and really understand what, the obstacles are to their access. Um, but finding the way to partner with organizations like you and many others in the city, like, the Digital Access Center at Temple University that does computer distribution, and other organizations that can offer devices or training. We see ourselves as one of those mediators, digital navigators that can bring people into the ecosystem. And we really depend on all of you to be able to support them once they've actually gotten internet access and are still trying to figure out what adoption of that internet looks like for them.
That's great. Jim has I think, somewhat related question, which is interested in what PCW learned about adoption needs in their networks, such as digital navigators, et cetera. Have you found this to be a significant need? I think that speaks a little bit to what you were just saying. One thing I'll quickly say in our conversations with community organizations is I was often kind of giving them what we call our digital equity 101 talk, at the very top of our conversations with folks before we get into community internet. And a lot of people didn't know about all of the resources that are currently available in Philadelphia around digital navigation. There's the network that is centralized through the city, through their Office of Innovation and Technology. Calling 311 in Philadelphia gets you connected to digital navigators at the city and to local organizations that do digital navigation work. So a lot of folks needed a lot of information, including about community internet. I'll put it to PCW if you've seen lessons learned from adoption needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alex was really already alluding to it. When we have the opportunity to go into people's homes, meet with them in their private spaces, we end up learning a lot more about what their actual needs are. And internet access, of course, we all know is only one part of the digital equity equation. We have partnerships, and I would do lots of referrals for folks, especially also folks who maybe sign up for our internet access, but we're not able to service them because they're outside of our service zone or for other technical reasons. We'll refer folks to, the digital navigators, to various types of ways of getting low cost or no cost devices. And I think that a lot of the times, people who have had internet previously but aren't able to afford it right now are in a different kind of relationship with digital equity overall and adoption versus folks who have never been able to have home internet. And those are the folks that really kind of need the most overall support. And we're able to provide a little bit of that support by kind of referring to other partners in the city who are completely focused on that work while we kind of hone in on providing internet access for free, which is not something that any other organization is really doing in the city.
I'm curious, Leanne, if you have any highlights from the conversations that we had with organizations, specific comments that people made, or memorable things that we learned. I conducted these conversations with Leanne, so this is it's a little bit of a biased question because I was there for all of them too. But I'm just curious if there's anything that stands out to you, the stuff that we learned from community members.
Definitely. Like you said, there's so many different things. I think about we did an event with a digital passport cohort from the Temple University Gateway community group. And these were folks that were going through kind of a year long or a double semester long process of engaging with different types of kind of digital literacy, mainly focused skills workshops that are offered throughout Temple or through Temple's ecosystem. And so they were in this stage where they were telling us about all of these things that they learned about security and about kind of online and how to talk to their neighbors and their friends about these resources. But they were like, we didn't know that this internet option exists. And, there's so much to learn and there's so many things that people need support with. And I just remember thinking, wow, like here are people who are very engaged in kind of the digital literacy aspect, and they're so excited about the concept of community internet, and they are kind of like the meat of what a community internet network can be. One person gave me her card. We've been in touch. She's been referring people to me, things like that. So things like that stand out to me for sure, David. I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, I loved, to describe how community internet works. There were all these different ways to describe it. You have this amazing map that you all have online. At one point, we took like, solo cups, and we're kind of showing people what North Square kind of looks like with cups, which partially inspired our idea for creating a diagram of it that we could use for events like this. So that, the purpose of the illustration that you all saw was to have something that kind of gives you a quick sense of, it's a complex but kind of visually coherent glimpse of like what the community network actually looks like, using North Square. And so I thought that, what was cool was people were so interested, and they really wanted to understand it at like a technical level. I was often surprised that folks that, may have had a very limited understanding, even of like their own internet, like a lot of folks that didn't even really know exactly who their internet provider was, they wanted to know exactly how community wireless worked. Like, what are the devices? How do you get the internet coming from a wire, like how does this even work, like physically? And so it was really cool to activate people's curiosity in that way, and then to just to find all these different ways. And I also remember a really cool event that we did with the Welcoming Center with some of their groups who are, immigrants who are dealing with, mostly affordability issues around their own internet needs. And many of them have experiences in other countries where public internet is just kind of taken for granted. Like, I never had to think about this until I came to the United States. You go outside and there's internet available, and you don't really think too much about it. And the reason you don't think too much about it is because it's just kind of available everywhere. There's a real investment in other countries in public, and often municipal, like Wi-Fi networks that folks are used to. So they don't have to ask these questions. And so that was a really interesting conversation to bring kind of international perspective to it, which I was thinking, oh, that would be interesting lens for folks to understand, like how things are different here, why this is so complex in the United States. So I really appreciated that comparison.
Yeah, I think those are both really important points, David, and I think get to what makes it a community network and what makes community networks unique. And even back to your first question about, community networks are more likely to engage people to participate in the construction and understanding of the network, and so more likely to, leverage all the other digital equity resources in the city as well. Um, I think the distinction I sometimes I think is hard to draw, and it's kind of a gray area. But if we kind of say there's private internet, public internet, and community internet, I really think of community internet as this thing that encompasses both, but also arises because those two are not satisfying people's needs. We have private internet in America. It's if you can afford it. And then we have little public internet, but there are places where you can go for sure to get public networks, and there should be more of that. But what community networks are really all about, and at least in our case, we're trying to model, is that the community network spans the private and public space. We build both private and public networks for different purposes. There's different shades of private and public and levels of security and openness to networks. And everything needs to be customized, down to the neighborhood and the block and what that little community wants. And the kind of federated model that can grow out of that, where everyone feels like they can have a sort of personalized community network, is this amazing idea that I hope we can continue to inspire people to want to build wherever they are, and especially in the places where, because the government and private enterprise has failed to solve the problems, people should feel like they can take these matters into their own hands.
Yeah. I have a question around that, on your last point, and I can maybe bring Kate into the conversation, who's kind of the expert in this, which is how does, thinking about alternative internet options and specifically community networks intersect with what has been happening at the federal level around the expansion of broadband? I think a lot of folks that we spoke to were aware of very recent expansion in broadband subsidies. So they may have been familiar with the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP program, where many of the folks that we spoke to, right, remember getting fairly high quality free internet, for about 2 years before that program lapsed. Um, I'm curious how you see these alternatives and community internet kind of maybe serving as like an alternative or like a silver lining or something around this kind of general federal landscape right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alex really hit the nail on the head when you said that, these community internet networks kind of fill in a gap that the market and government have not been able to meet. Um, yeah, I think as you said, David, there have been, there was a few years ago the Affordable Connectivity Program, which helped a lot of people get online, be able to afford internet or be able to get internet for free. But the federal government was not able to sustain that. They did not keep funding that. And so, that's also, I mean, this also speaks to a trust issue that kind of local community groups like Philly Community Wireless and the nonprofits that they work with um, have trusted relationships in communities. And with the Affordable Connectivity Program, a lot of people were able to sign up for that program only to have the rug pulled out from under them, right? And have the program end abruptly. And so suddenly they had internet bills again or higher internet bills. And so I think this community internet model is a model where, because it really is building alongside and empowering the community, it speaks to a lot of those kind of trust issues. It's reliable. It's here. It's not some big federal program that can come and go. Um, and then as you also kind of alluded to, as many folks here probably know, there is currently a really large federal program, the BEAD program, that has been rolling out across the country, which had, at the start, I think a lot of people were really hopeful that this would address a lot of areas of the country where there is not currently good internet infrastructure. But that program under the current administration has really been gutted in a lot of ways. There are, a lot less infrastructure is being rolled out. There's been a big priority towards satellite internet that is not as quality and reliable in parts of the country, especially where it's not suited to the terrain. Um, and so, this is really, not to get kind of political about it, right? But I think in this current moment, a lot of people are feeling really hopeless and feeling like, that the government is not supportive, right? And that there's not much you can do about it, right? But the community internet is have a real answer to that, right? It is something that people can do, something small that can happen in your community, at a small level, or kind of be built out at a larger level. But it's a great kind of opportunity for folks to can really step up and meet the needs in their immediate community that they're not being met by other sources.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most rewarding parts of our work, and something we aspire to do both locally and kind of more broadly state, national, in conversations like this, is to kind of activate that thinking, right? Where people feel maybe stuck with the options that we have around us and the limitations and kind of like things not going the way that we were hoping they were going to go a couple of years ago. How can we kind of take that feeling and instead flip it into energy and flip it into opportunities where we can build together with our communities and actually kind of also help people rebuild trust? To go back to that point that Kate was saying, I do a lot of the coordinating and the discussion with community members when we're kind of arranging for them to host our equipment. And a lot of the times I'm getting questions like, are you guys going to start charging me in 3 months? Like, what's the catch? What's actually going to happen here? And part of my job and our job as a community internet network is to say, no, you are part of this. We are working on this together. And we're not interested in kind of like taking something from you. We actually want to enter this reciprocal relationship with you, where you are helping us build and help your neighbors and kind of expand as an organization. And you play such a crucial role in that. And we're not going to charge you in 3 months. And so rebuilding that trust, activating kind of a little bit of imagination, and things like that is such an important part of what we do. And like I mentioned, both locally, and then I also think in conversations like this, I hope that folks who are listening in on this webinar, kind of one of the big takeaways is that you can advocate for this on a broad scale, but you can also start small, build with community, and just try to think through or think bigger or differently about what internet access can look like for folks.
I don't think I can find a better point to end that on. So I think that's a really wonderful sentiment. It definitely came through in all of our conversations, and it's been really inspiring again to just see the growth that PCW has had and how this network has expanded through the community. If anybody has any questions or want to follow up with us, please be in touch, right? You can join TLC, you can be part of our listserv, or you can become an organizational member with us if you're in the Philadelphia area. And connect with Philly Community Wireless, right? If you're in the Philadelphia area, even if you can't get the service directly, you can volunteer, you can get up on rooftops and learn how to do this stuff. It's really cool. So I just hope that everybody will be in touch. And thanks so much, everybody, for attending today.